Now, there are times where going the extra mile in video game storytelling yields rich results. Other times, though, not so much. And that's when we're left utterly confused. And obviously the titles that we're covering today definitely add to that confusion. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 7 most complicated video game stories absolutely nobody understands. Number 7, Fire Emblem: The Blazing Blade. Now, starting off, simply understanding the continuity of the Fire Emblem franchise is difficult enough. Of the 13 or so games in the series, only Sacred Stones, Three Houses, and Fates serve as standalone titles. Every other entry is somehow connected to another with no consistency to be seen. But Blazing Blade is special in this regard. This was the first game to come out of Japan and the prequel to the never-localized Binding Blade. It's also one of the most difficult to comprehend by itself. You see, the story is told across static scenes with mountains of exposition-heavy dialogue, making all sense of narrative drama utterly non-existent, and each event into something nearly impossible to process when all you have on screen are a few character sprites. And this is without mentioning the story itself, which mainly consists of characters spending their time talking about murder plots and organizations that want to take over the world, and yet we're never shown anything. Everything is just verbally explained. Combine this with the amount of characters introduced and subplots opened, and you'll quickly find yourself lost and confused for most of the time, something that in turn makes the emotional moments rather stale and boring. While there are a ton of beloved characters from the Fire Emblem franchise in this game, the same can't be said about its convoluted narrative. Number 6, Dark Souls. Now, Dark Souls is, according to popular media outlets, one of the most difficult games of recent times. But the only thing harder than being stabbed betwixt the cheeks all the time is trying to understand the cryptic item descriptions. The story of Dark Souls is mainly told through out-of-context dialogue and environments that somehow hint at what is happening. But of course, none of it makes sense unless you have the Dark Souls wiki on hand at all times and VIII's entire video library up on play. Not to mention that paying attention to your surroundings while being bombarded with knights and snipers becomes quite a jarring experience after a while. Now, the narrative is interesting with elements of insanity and grief, something that the game itself will make you feel often. But even so, you'll have to watch a lot of YouTube videos in order to get even a shred of an idea as to what the full lore of Dark Souls is like in its entirety. Number 5, Xenoblade Chronicles. What starts off as a relatively simple to understand story about Shulk and his friends seeking to destroy a big evil and bring peace to the world quickly gets more and more confusing as it goes on. Xenoblade Chronicles never runs out of plot twists and sudden conveniences that are always very hard to believe. Major events that take place at the beginning end up completely retconned. Characters never find one consistent goal to follow. And above all else, Shulk never stops screaming Fiora's name. Cheers for that, mate. And these are all details you can't ever lose sight of, as the game is 100 hours long, meaning that if you aren't paying attention, you're gonna get lost fast. And things get worse once you play the seemingly unrelated sequel, a game that already takes the established lore from the first game and drops a few bombshells to change everything you thought you knew about an already inconsistent story, only to then throw you another left hook with its standalone DLC. Number 4, Metal Gear Solid. In the distant future of 2005, a little Black Ops unit named Foxhound stole a bunch of high-grade nuclear weapons. This organization was run by a guy called Liquid Snake, who's actually a clone of an entirely different person called Big Boss. There's also a character called Solid Snake, who's Liquid Snake's unofficial brother. Solid Snake goes on to defeat Liquid Ocelot, who is not the same person as Liquid Snake, but is at the same time. It's, confusing to say the least. While a beloved classic made by legendary game designer Hideo Kojima, Metal Gear Solid is undeniably one of the most confusing games ever to be put on disc. With multiple clones, characters who end up not being what they say they are, sequels actually being prequels, and a massive lack of consistency, the Metal Gear Solid franchise is a very tumultuous beast at best, especially from Metal Gear Solid 5 and onwards, when Hideo Kojima left the franchise after being fired by Konami. And this is all without mentioning the spin-offs and bonus content, which each game uses to expand the lore even further. The story of Solid Snake is close to our hearts, but the series desperately needs a coherent timeline explanation. Number 3, Final Fantasy VIII. Now, any of the Final Fantasy games could have really been on this list. I mean, there's Final Fantasy X with its non-existent main character, Final Fantasy VII with its constant political talk and story inconsistencies, and Final Fantasy IV with its, dead characters that just come back to life whenever they fancy. but Final Fantasy VIII specifically stands out. The story in the game from the very beginning becomes confusing and nearly impossible to follow, with a constant back and forth between the political unrest of the world and main character Squall's personal life, something that the game goes to great lengths to make as hard to understand as possible. And things get even more confusing once you beat Disc 1, which is when the rest of the game starts contradicting itself. Characters like Renoa, who previously showed no romantic interest in Squall, are now suddenly in love with him. The baffling reveal that all of the main characters actually knew each other way in the past when they were kids, and now there's just a war that's taking place that just seems to have come out of nowhere. All of this culminates in a finale with random visuals and trippy imagery which seems like something out of an experimental indie film, only for everything to go back to normal afterwards with no explanation in a credit sequence that explains anything at all. While other games in this series are hard to follow at times, Final Fantasy VIII earns the spot on this list for not even trying to make sense. Number 2. Kingdom Hearts. Now, Disney likes simple, which is why all of their movies follow straightforward storylines that any kid could watch. The only exception to this is apparently Kingdom Hearts. Unlike other entries on this list, the story of Kingdom Hearts can't just be told with one game. Now, instead, not only do you have to play each of the main games in the series, but also the spin-offs in order to have any idea of what the hell is happening. But chances are, even then you'll still be confused. Now, the first game is relatively easy to follow, with Sora just trying to find his friends after they were separated. However, by the time you reach Kingdom Hearts 2, you'll be introduced to clones who don't have feelings except for when it's convenient for the story. An entire organization created by the villain you just killed in the last game, who was actually an entirely different character, and memory wiping as characters don't remember the events of previous entries. Brilliant! And this is just the beginning, as Dream Drop Distance further expands on this lore by adding in time travel, dreams within dreams, and previously defeated villains coming back from the dead. And number 1, Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, unlike other entries on this list, Five Nights at Freddy's has been impossible to understand from the very first game, with a cryptic and eerie story that includes child murder, haunted animatronics, and a lot of Atari-style minigames. In order to fully understand everything in the narrative, you'll have to play all 10 games in the franchise, which also include an AR and VR game, read all of the books, which range from about 300 to 500 pages each, and of course supposedly expand on the story but actually end up making things more confusing. And to top it all off, if you can't even stomach all of that, then you've got to sit through watching Matt Pat explained all of his stuff over on Game Theory. And trust me, the guy's made a lot of videos. A lot of videos. Characters who were considered dead constantly come back to life for no explainable reason, and each entry continues to add more and more animatronics whose origins are unknown. And then there's the timeline. Oh god, the timeline! A series of events that is never consistent. Even when you think you've reached a definitive timeline, a new game will come out that will make you throw everything you thought you knew out of the bloody window. And with the series expanding further each year, it doesn't seem likely that we'll get a proper explanation for anything anytime soon. Cheers, Scott. And there we go, my friends. Those were the 7 most complicated video game stories absolutely nobody understands. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friends. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. I'm going to say something that is very, very simple, seeing as we've been dealing with a lot of complicated stuff today, and that is that you, my friend listening to this video, yes, you are a massive ledge, and you deserve all the best things in life. So treat yourself well, both mentally and physically, because you are a massive ledge, as I've just stated. Now go out there and utterly smash it. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.